Hey everybody, and welcome to AE201, looking at offline VFX work. Now, offline VFX is when we just don't have the time to wait until the visual effects department can do stuff properly, and we need to mock up something quickly in order to visualize how the scene's going to look. These are generally effects that might affect the story, might affect viewings, or even just for presentation reasons if you're sending this out to the network or, execs, higher-ups. They don't really want to be looking at insert cards or, someone holding a gun when there could be a muzzle flash in there, for example. So some of the things that we're going to look at is comping two different pieces of video for performance or story reasons.
Oh, hey man, how you going?
Not too bad, man, not too bad. Doing keyframe speed effects.
Here, catch.
Screen inserts and some basic green screen keying.
Oh, gotta take this. Oh. Hey man.
Hey everybody! And of course a good old fashioned paint out, like getting rid of a boom mic in shot.
Like this.
Plus, in taking a look at this stuff and the workflows of building these effects solely using Avid's own built-in effects and no plugins at all, will help to give you some grounding in the most common effects in Avid use, like 3D warp, time warp, animat, spectromat. You'll get an introduction to these, and hopefully after taking a look at this video, you'll have enough of a vocabulary in it to start playing around with it yourself more and using it in your projects. So, let's take a look. Right guys, before we get started, a couple of things. First of all, I want to elaborate a little bit more on offline effects. Now this is any and all effects work that will be done in the Avid, in Edit, by either the editor or the assistant, or sometimes the visual effects editor, during the edit, during the offline editorial stage, before an edit's locked. These effects, depending on who you're showing it to or what the purpose is, they can look quite rough at times. There's one or two of the ones that I'm going to show you that I've done here that do look a little bit rough because I've not spent that much time on them. But it's alright if these do look a little rough as long as they achieve the main goal, which would be to convey the scene, tell the story that's going on during this visual effect. So say for example someone gets shot, we might need to see where that bullet hits them. Because I think you'll agree that this can affect the story quite significantly if a character is shot in the shoulder versus, say, shot in the face. Another example might be a video call happening in the scene. Now, quite often the character may be holding a tablet or a laptop or a phone or something, and it'll just be a green screen with some tracking points on there. Now, it's kind of hard to cut the scene even if you put the audio over it, with just that dialogue there. And we could use 3D warp and literally just sit the video roughly on top of it and do a rough track. But in order to get the feel of it, we're going to want to try and insert it as best we can. But as we all know, in editorial, we don't tend to always have a lot of time. So depending on the amount of time you have, if this is going out to network for a screening, and your level of proficiency and a number of other factors, you want to just try and get this to the best level you can within those constraints and pass it back to the editor so that they can insert it into their cut. But as I said, as long as you're achieving that main goal of seeing the scene unbroken, and we get the story beats that the visual effects shot is trying to tell, because remember, no matter what part you're doing in filmmaking, it always comes back to story, then you should be all good. The edit should be able to continue. And I've seen a wide range of these. I've seen some really, really shoddy visual effects done with dodgy keyframe tracks in an Avid. And I've also seen some gosh darn impressive ones that could probably almost passes the finished thing. So yeah, it does just depend on what kind of level you're working at. And the second thing that I wanted to mention before we get started is that I just want to highlight some of the effects within Avid that we're going to use. And these will be the main ones. These will be my go-to that I kind of use for almost everything. And also, just to let you know, the main reason why I'm only using Avid Effects is so that we can kind of keep this in an offline environment. We're not trying to look too professional. And these will always be at your disposal, no matter what post facility you're in. If Avid Media Composer's installed, these will be there. Whereas if you're relying on something like Boris FX or Red Giant plugins or something like that, unless your production swing for it, or if the post facility already has it, they might not always be available to you. And they're a much more complex thing in their own right, which does deserve investigation, but maybe at some point in the future. So let's take a look at these common effects, shall we? So I'm going to bring up the effects palette here. And the first one that has to be mentioned is 3D Warp. 3D Warp is the ultimate effect in Avid that can do most things. You can do keying in there. You can do chroma keying. You can do any kind of transform effects, moving the clip around, rotating, scaling. You can change the opacity, deal with borders. You could do it a whole heck of a lot in 3D Warp. And it actually kind of, nullifies and voids a few other effects that are in here. Such as resize. It's essentially made resize utterly pointless, because you can do everything there in 3D Warp. Next up, I just want to highlight two in the key category, and this is Animat and Spectromat. So there's three other keyers here that are useful in various circumstances. But generally speaking, if I'm doing green screen or blue screen or any kind of keying of a primary color for a foreground or background plate, I'm going to use Spectromat. I just find it to be the most comprehensive and capable at that particular use case. And Animat is your go-to tool for doing any kind of masking. We can draw and change and manipulate any kind of shape of mask within Animat and place it on relatively easily. And last but not least, I just want to highlight the Time Warp tool. Time Warp is what you'll be throwing onto your clips if you have to do literally any kind of retiming at all. We're throwing a Time Warp on there, will allow you to keyframe retimes, and it's really quite simple to use, to be honest. You'll notice that there are a number of other time manipulation effects under Time Warp, and in a way, they are just kind of the variations of Time Warp. These are presets that are to do one specific thing. So if you throw trim to fill on there, it's going to retime a shot as you stretch it out to fit the new duration that you've stretched it to. Speed boost, you're going a bit faster. Reverse motion, you're reversing time. Freeze frame, you're just throwing the Time Warp to 0% speed. So the first frame becomes a freeze frame that you can drag as much as you need it to. And so on, and there's a couple of speed ramps up here as well. But all of these could probably be configured manually with the Time Warp effect, and so I generally don't really use any of these other ones, except occasionally I will use the freeze frame. I'll admit that, just because it's quick. But that's enough of me yapping on. Let's take a look at some effects timelines. So let's start here with the simplest and potentially the most common one of a boom paint out here. Now, I have one particular method of how I like to do paint outs for anything. It's very, very common, and particularly in studio stuff, and particularly like comedies and sitcoms, where before they start rolling their action, they'll make sure that the boom and the boom op here is completely clear. And then before they go to yell cut, the boom op will maybe just stand completely in frame and just set the boom right next to the actors, because they know the actors aren't going to move. It's a completely controlled environment, and because they have that clean plate at the start, they're going to be able to be painted out without any issue. So I'll play the base layer here just now, and this is the same one you saw at the start. So I'm sitting here in my relatively untidy room that needs better cable management, and if I play this down,
like this,
nothing happens. In fact, the brush just leans in further closer to me. But if I go up a layer and enable this right here with our animate mask,
like this,
we see it disappear. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this timeline and rebuild this effect from scratch to show you what's done here. Right, so here I am in my duplicated timeline. You can see that there's no effects been done here. This is just my base layer, and I'm just pointing upward. Now, all I've done is I've added an edit at the point on V2 where I want my boom to disappear. Now, here I've scrubbed along the same source clip, and I've found a point that doesn't have the boom in shot, where our boom op is moved out the way. And I'm just going to cut a little piece of that shot in. Now, I don't want any movement just in case these shadows or anything move here. I kind of want those static, and just in case, because I think the boom would dip back in a minute anyway. So what I'm going to do is just jump back to my effect palette, which I'll redock here. And I'm going to throw that freeze frame effect on there that I showed you before, which is just going to make this a freeze frame. And now what I'm going to do actually is swap my plates around in the hierarchy, and I'm going to put my action layer above on V3. Right, now I'll just add an edit here from where I want my mask to start. And like I said before, if you want a mask, we're going to use animate. So it's right here, and I'll drag that on. So if I scrub all around, I'll just go to the point where the boom is in the most. Seems to be about here. And then I can see that this is the area that I want to replace. So now all I need to do is click my layer with our animate on and open up Effect Editor. You'll see that for me, it appears slightly zoomed out. That's because it will resume the previous state as to last time you used Effect Editor, and I always like to be slightly zoomed out. This is a bit easier when I've got my full monitor space, but you know, my ultra wide doesn't like the recording. It ends up being really squeezed. So for the purpose of these videos, I'm going to do it here, and we're going to draw our mask. Now we have a bunch of controls here under Animate. There is a whole lot that you can do in this tool, but to get us started and keep things a little simple, we're just going to use the Poly tool. Now other applications might call this something like the Pen tool or the Point tool. Basically it's just we're going to click points to draw a shape, a mask shape. So once I enable that, my cursor changes to a little cross, and then I can just click to make points all around here, and I'm just going to go along that shadow as well, just in case there's any differences in lighting in our plates. We can blend it a bit easier. Click point, click point, click point. Cool. Now one issue that you may have noticed, now that we've finished our shape, is that the animate is actually preserving the action from our top plate as opposed to the bottom one. So for all of our action, we're getting the freeze frame, and for our boom mic area, we could just see the boom. And to fix that, not a problem. We just come over here in the effect editor under foreground, and we click swap screen. And now we've swapped the layers that we're applying the mask to, so we're now looking a lot better. Now this looks great here when I've got the shape selected, but if I deselect my shape, you'll see that, well, we've got rid of our boom in the action. The wall looks a bit weird here because the lighting had changed near the end of the take when the boom op had left frame so we could get our clean plate, and this is resulting in the weird shading you can see here. Now if you're in a studio environment, you probably wouldn't run into this because the lighting would be much better controlled, and they probably wouldn't be using an iPhone to film this, which has an annoying auto exposure that even when you think you've turned off, it still seems to come back on. No, in most professional environments this tends to not be as much of an issue, but it does still sometimes happen. You know, if you're working outside, for example, and the sun changes, you can't have much control over that. So all I would do in this case is apply a bit of a color correction to my clean plate just to brighten this up a bit to try and match it. Here's one I prepared earlier. And that gets me a good bit closer. And then I would just open up my animate again, click my shape, and we'd do a bit of feathering. So I would enable feathering a bit, and there we go. I'd say that looks a lot better. Now if you were to look in really closely, you would see the dividing line. You know, you could see it here a bit, but that would pass a viewing without a problem. I'm sure most people in editorial and producers wouldn't have too much of an issue with this. And then when you get to online, the online/DI guys would probably be able to sort something like this in Flame or whatever app they choose. Or if it was a particularly difficult one, you know, maybe the VFX guys would do it. But that is one example here of how you could you know, use Animat to mask out something unwanted in your frame. Right, next one was our double take. So here's the double take that you saw at the beginning of this video.
Oh, hey man, how you going? Not too bad, man, not too bad.
And this one is actually really simple and is just drawing off of a similar idea with some Animat masking that we looked at before. But I'll show you anyway, since you also need to take into account timing of performance as well. So, as before, I'll double this sequence and recreate. Right, now in this case there's dialogue, right? So our first character here says,
Oh, hey man, how you going?
and then our second character has a response.
Not too bad, man, not too bad.
So how I would go about laying this in is I would play down my bass clip here, and just hit pause on the moment when I feel like the response should come in. You should just sort of feel the moment.
Oh, hey man, how you going?
That works for me. And then line up at the other side to the next bit of dialogue.
Not too bad, man, not too bad. Not too bad, man, not too bad.
Cool. And then I'll just cut the video onto V2 and the audio onto 3 and 4. So now we've got our timing.
Hey man, how you going? Not too bad, man, not too bad.
All we need to do now is make our mask. So once again, we'll jump over and grab Animat. I'm going to throw it on the top layer here. And once again, enable that lovely, lovely poly tool. So just in case there's any reflections that cause major differences between the two plates here and this monitor here, I'm going to make my dividing line right just to the left of that monitor. So I'm going to go about here. I'm just going to cut all the way through the middle and of the shot and just pick that half of this shot. Boom, there we go. Now again, you can see it's not quite as obvious here, but there is a visual difference where we see a bit of shading here. So I'm just going to do a little bit of feathering this time, not as much as last time, to do a bit of blending. So it's now much more subtle. Nice, I'll buy that. And now if I come out of there, here's what I've got so far.
Oh, hey man, how you going? Not too bad, man, not too bad.
Now you can see here that our version of Jack on the left started to look away before the end here. So the filming, the timing here wasn't exactly right. And I want to keep that duration because I like the performance of, you know, Jack number 2 here on the right. So how I'm going to sort this is once Jack number 1 over here is finished turning his head and looks to camera and he's sort of settled in his end position, I'm going to just add an edit like I've got here. That's about here. And then I'm going to apply a time warp to slow down this end chunk of video, just to slow down the video a little bit so that he doesn't look away before I want him to. So I'll come up to Effect Palette here, go to Time Warp, and throw Time Warp on. Now, it's popped up right away here, but I'm just going to disable that so I can show you. You'll notice that if you have Effect Editor open over a Time Warp effect, it doesn't bring up any controls, and that's because Time Warp has its own effect editor, aptly named the Motion Effect Editor. Now, I do have it mapped to a key, but you'll find it under Tools, down here next to Effect Editor. And this is what it looks like. And we have a number of controls here. We have different graphs that we can use, and different ways to generate our time warps, from flame blending to VTR, you know, whole frame styles and recalculating. But for now, all we're going to look at is the speed graph. So if you click this icon up here, right below the time warp icon, where you see like a little man running, it'll bring up a speed graph. And here's where we can begin to make speed changes. So we have one keyframe that's already applied to the start. And in this particular case, all I want to do is slow down the entire piece of video. So I'm not going to be adding any additional keyframes. Don't worry though, we're going to get to that in a bit. So all I need to do to go that is come down to this entry box here, which is your speed percentage. So it's currently set to 100 as a normal play speed. But if I reduce this to say 90, and then we scrub to the end here, we can see he's still starting to look away. So I'm going to slow him down a little bit more and go to 85. Don't really want to go much more than that though, because if you start to slow it down too much and the footage isn't meant for it, it's like it's not shot at a particularly high frame rate or anything, then it's going to start to look weird. So that looks okay actually. So I'm just going to render this and then have a look. The render effect button is over here, by the way, if you ever want to have a quick render. You don't necessarily have to for retimes and effects. But if I'm starting to stack effects, then I would like to render stuff before I preview it. I had one too many annoying experiences of red lines appearing up the top. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. And I'll buy that. That totally works and is perfectly believable for offline purposes, even if the camera work is super bloody shoddy and is all askew. But that's what you get, I suppose, when you're using an iPhone to film and you got your tripod for £5 off of Amazon. Hey ho. Right, now furthering the same idea here, the next one we're going to look at is doing a keyframe time warp. See? Told you. So here's the one that you saw on the intro. I throw something at camera. And it slows down for a very anticlimactic finish of me picking something up off the floor. Now, the footage here was shot at 240 frames per second. Again, on my iPhone, so it's not the best, but it works for demonstration purposes. So let's do our demo. So here's what the shot looks like initially.
Here, catch.
Now this is after the material has just been linked in, and Avid is automatically applying what it calls a motion adapter onto it, which is basically a time warp. It is retiming the source material to play in real time on your timeline. Now if I just click on the clip, I can see my motion adapter there, and I just hit my button for the effect editor. We can see that the motion effect editor comes up, and we can see that some blended respeeding has been done. And if we click this button up here called Promote to Time Warp, then it's going to do exactly that. It's going to promote this motion adapter to a time warp. And so we've got our speed graph here. We've got all the controls that we had before. And I'm just going to use this slider here to make it a bit smaller so as you can see. And you can see our line is way up here. So it's resped to 400% in order to get it to play in real time. Now, within our graph here, we can just scrub along to the point at which we want to begin our respeed. And I'm going to want this to happen right when I go to throw the ball, right when there's the action happening. Now, this might be, a gun being fired, you want the bullet to go in slow motion. It could be a ball being thrown. It could be glass shattering. It could be whatever your action is that you've recorded in a high frame rate. Here's right at the beginning of the action is where you're going to want to start playing with time. So once you scrub to that point, I'm going to just add a keyframe. You can do that with this little button down here, add keyframe. But I'm going to use the keyboard because it's just a bit easier for me. So I'm going to add my keyframe, and I could, now if I wanted to create a speed ramp here, then I would go a bit further along, add another keyframe, and drag this down, or just type 100, and we'd end up with a bit of a speed ramp. But that's actually kind of hard to see because in our use case, the bit where we want our slow-mo is really short. The ball's not in the frame for that much. So what I'm going to do is just reopen my time warp and delete that keyframe. I'm going to jump back to this one, move forward a single frame, and add another. Then in my second keyframe, I'll just type 100. So we're not having a ramp that we'd be able to visually see. This is just on one frame, it's playing at normal speed, 400%, and then on the next frame, we've slowed it right down. Oh, and by the way, if you're confused of this 400% and 100% terminology here, this is because our source material, in this case, is 240 frames, and our Avid project is 60 frames. Right, so to do the rest of this, I'm just going to scrub over a bit here until the ball goes out of frame. I'm going to try and do this a little bit better than the initial demo until about there. Then I'll add another keyframe, forward one frame again, add another, type 400, so we're back to normal speed. Cool, that's that done. Now we have to deal with our audio, which so far has been completely unaffected. And now I could go into the RTAS tool and show you time compression, expansion, and slow down the sound. But offline effects, if we were trying to be quick here and get this in before a viewing, there's a cheaper and easier way to do it, which would be to just add an edit about here. And then later on, the ball hits the camera, and we can see the camera actually shake. So on the first frame of that shake, I'm just going to get the waveform of the hit and put it on that frame. And there we go. Now our sound at least makes sense. But now I've got a gap in the middle here. And I'm going to fix that nice and easy by simply adding in a sound effect. And then we should be all done. Let's take a look.
Here, catch.
Sweet. As a side note here at this point, by the way, I just want to say that I know the footage might not be the most exciting to look at, but I like to think that it's conveying the idea and the point, and it's showing the tools. Plus, for anybody who's signed up to the editor tier on Patreon, all of this footage will be made available to you to practice these visual effects stuff. Right, now we've got one left here from the start, and I've deliberately left this to last because it's the kind of the more complex one, and I know some people watching are probably going to disagree about how I've built it, but what can you do? This is the screen insert, and to give you the rundown of this one, I'm going to show you the base plate first before we take a look at the effect again. So here it is here. This is our hero plate where we have our character looking at a laptop screen, and they have a tablet on the desk as well. So the laptop screen is pure green. We don't necessarily need any tracking points on that because it's a static camera and it's a static static screen. But later on, he picks up the tablet and he's holding that in his hand, so it's got a bit of a shake to it, so that will need tracked. And thankfully, we have some little tracking points in there to help us with that. So that is what needs to be achieved here, and let's take a look at how I did when I gave myself half an hour to do this earlier.
Hey man.
Hey everybody. So yes, I know this can look a bit shoddy here. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, and if I had more time I'd actually refine this track a bit. So when we do it here, we're going to try and improve it a little bit. But before we get started into a demo here, I'm going to go get myself some dinner, and I'll come back and record the demo for this once I get my kids to sleep. So see you guys then. A few hours later. Righto, that's much better. Got some food in me. Where were we? Screen inserts. So as I was saying before, this pair of screen inserts that we have here is perfectly workable. Like that would pass in a scene for a viewing. It tells the story. But when we get to recreating it in our demo here, let's see if we can make it a little bit nicer. Right, so this here is our hero plate, where we have green on the MacBook screen, and we've got green on the tablet screen with some tracking points here. So first off is I would tackle the MacBook screen. Let's get that out of the way first, and that can sort of serve as a middle plate since the iPad's going to come in front of it. Now what was done in the previous example I showed you worked perfectly well, I think. I had just put an older version of my logo in there just as a sort of temp screen for them to be working on. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I could put in there. You know, depending on what your character's doing, I might make something in an external app. You know, I once animated together a small video of a hacking screen of a character cracking into a police database and trying to get information on another character. That was for Guns Akimbo. You know, obviously before the visual effects guys did it properly. This is just for during the edit. But that was a crucial story point that we needed to see what was on. So we needed to see what she was doing, hacking in the information that she was retrieving. So we needed a bit more detail there. We couldn't just throw in a temp. Right, so back to Avid. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bump this up a layer. And I'm going to throw on a spectrum matte effect. Just to key out the green. It's going to be a nice solid green here, so that won't be a problem. But one thing to do is before you select the color that you want your spectrum matte to key out, I'll just click this button up here called bypass, because you'll see that it's already doing a bit of a key on the default blue color here. And that can color shift what is in the frame, so you won't get the most accurate key if you just jump to doing it straight away. It's a bit annoying, it's a bit weird, but if you just bypass the effects that it's doing first, then you select your color in the frame, you know, you'll get a better key. So once that's bypassed, I'm just going to click in this little key box here. Then we'll be able to select our color, and then I'll click in here, anywhere on the screen, that's a solid green color. And then I'll undo the bypass, and you'll see it's selected all this green here on the two screens. So that's ideal, that's what I want. So now that I've selected that, it's looking behind here, just like how our animat mask worked. It's looking behind to the layer below, and it's black because, oh, well, there's nothing there right now. Now for our screen insert. So as I said, I'm going to use an old image of my logo here. It's actually been improved a little bit since then, if anyone's noticed. But I have this line around it. It'll work perfectly well for this purpose. So I'm just going to find where I want to do this from. I'm just going to actually get rid of everything on the timeline before there, since we don't need it. Then I'll just mark my my hero plate here just to get the duration, and then go to the layer above and throw this on. Now you might be thinking, hey, this is going underneath for the key. Why are you throwing it above? And that's a good question, and that is to help me do the placement. I'm going to sit on top so that I can see the whole plate and I can see the computer screen as I get the placement correctly. So I'll throw a 3D warp on here. Now in 3D warp we have a whole load of controls here, and I'm going to try and avoid these as much as I can. I only use them for precise control. I tend to prefer using these here, which allow me to click and drag to resize and rotate and move stuff around. And I've also got it mapped to my Stream Deck down here, so that's how I'm going to do it. So right now we're just trying to align this with that MacBook screen in the background. So first of all, I'm going to rotate it a bit this way, and then probably just a little bit this way. Look at that much. Cool. Now back to scaling. I'll just put it right on top. That's okay, just pretty close. That right on top there. Then I'll just go back to rotation here on the axis, just shift it there. So yeah, I think that's pretty close. You know, we can see that it's more or less where it should be in terms of the MacBook screen. And now if I just throw that under on the layer below, we can see that it's now keyed into the screen. Now this was a nice easy one because it's the logo and it's all black. If this was something where the edges had to align perfectly with the screen, you might want to you know, be a bit more refined about this and get it a bit closer. But for the moment, I'm going to leave that like that, and that'll do fine. Right, now the iPad. So this is going to be the tricky one. So for this, I'm going to start when the iPad's already roughly flat, so about here. Then we can worry about, you know, the bend afterwards. So I'll bring this up one again, patch to here, and I'm going to cut in this little image I've made here. Really should have made this a button to answer instead of a slider. I've just made this more difficult myself, but hey ho. Now, same deal again. Throw above. 3D warp. Crop it in. That's because this image is sized perfectly for the iPad, so when I link it in, even though I frame flexed it so it's correct, it's pillar boxing it a bit on the side, so I'm just cropping that bit off. Right, got that in there. Now I'm just going to do a position track. So just under position, I've just toggled on position tracking, and this will bring up the tracker window. And even through my key, because they're slightly different colors, we can see our 4 tracking points. So I can just move my tracker to any one of those, and it should track the rough position. Oh, no. Tracker's getting confused there. When it goes behind and it sees this. Right, let me show you an easy way to fix this. If you come out of your fix editor here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to move this up. I'm going to make a copy of this layer just by clicking and alt dragging. And then I'm going to delete the key. And I'll go back and do my track on this. And then there's nothing to see all the way through there to mess up our track. Yeah, stick to our tracking points the whole way because there's nothing interrupting it now. Boom. And we can also see, because we're doing this over green and not black here, that our image isn't actually big enough. And we can make this a little bit bigger. Right, so our position track is going fairly well from here, but that does leave us with all of this space. Now, we could be lazy and leave it like that, since the information is there. Depending on your editor, they might let you away with that. But we should try and at least do a keyframe of the rotation folding down, just so that the information is there on the iPad. So I'm going to extend it back. Right now, I could try and do tracking markers. And do position and rotation and scale tracking, which would probably be the official way to go about this. But I never seem to have much luck with it. Right, now you see what I mean? That hasn't worked at all. It's rotated it. It just really messed with the scaling and the rotation. And well, it is sticking to the screen and improving the scaling relatively well. It just doesn't work for me at all. I'm just going to do it manually. I think it's going to be a lot safer. Now all we have to do is fix when our character picks it up and how that goes. So what we're going to do is just when the iPad starts to move, we've already got a keyframe there. I'm going to just zoom in a bit to give me more space to see this. And then I like to just jump forward 10 frames each and add a keyframe. And I have my keyframes, by the way, set to add to open groups only, because I don't want to mess with any other points like my crop that I've done earlier. No reason in messing with that. So only my scaling, rotation and position, which is probably what I'm going to be tinkering with anyway. So once I've added a new keyframe every 10 frames, I'm just going to go every 10 frames and then readjust. And then hope that my keyframe track gets fixed. Right, now that's done, and that's looking kind of okay to me. You know, for the purposes of what we need it for. It does track and it looks okay. Now, you may be worried about this this green here, but that's going to get keyed to black anyway. And I think if I try and make this too small, it's not going to work that well in order to fit it on correctly. In order to fit it on exactly right and expand the blackout, we'd lose the icon. You wouldn't recognize what it is. Whereas if I just drop this under just now and show you what it'll look like, you know, we can kind of see it on the screen. And then as it goes and he picks it up, that's what we get. So it's not perfect, but it's not too bad. And the actual picking it up is actually looking slightly better than what was there initially. So, yay. But there's still plenty left to go here. So first off, I'm just going to add the call that comes in. This will be a nice and easy one. We simply find the point that we want to cut it in at. And well, throw it in. And then we'll do the same thing by throwing it up above to do our track. So I'll grab my 3D warp again, throw it on there, and right, so this is how this part's looking so far. Now you can see that because this is sticking out the edge with that 16:9 frame, we're actually seeing it in the MacBook green screen as well, because it's coming over there. So I am actually going to do a little crop on this, just to crop that in to at least the iPad bezels. Now just as one last point, just to sweeten the deal, I'm also going to add in a little matte key here of a very rough video screen with video call controls that I very quickly threw together in Affinity Photo. Now when you bring in a matte key, you actually don't have to put an effect on it. So you can just open it up in Effect Editor and you'll get some basic controls. But as I say, the controls are really basic. But down here, there'll be a little promote button, which will just turn it into a 3D matte key. And all that means is it's a matte key with controls of a 3D warp. I don't know why that isn't just on by default, because we'd all love to have those controls. So, but that's how you get additional controls if you're dealing with a matte key. So now I just want to apply roughly the same scaling and stuff down as I did on the iPad. And I'm going to see if I can use a little cheat here. If I go grab my effect editor or bring it out, go to my bin, put that 3D warp there. Then I'll go back to my iPad. I'll put this 3D warp over scaling and over rotate and over position. And you see now it's copied all the attributes that I had added to my iPad insert, so I don't need to do them all again. That is a good way to just copy specific attributes from another effect preset that you've already done. So we've got that there. So we've got our, cancel call, flip camera, and effects controls over on the left here. Now I'm just going to dial the opacity of this down a little bit. I think it's looking a little too, popping out at you. But a neat little trick here is if you're trying to add two different plates onto the same thing, like onto this iPad here as we're doing, and you want to, track the same movement. So you don't actually have to run your track again. If you come back to your first one that you did, open up the tracking window, which you can do here. And then as long as your tracks are enabled, like here, you can enable and disable a tracker. You can right click here under where it says point A and go copy enabled tracks. So I'm going to copy that. Then I jump back to my video call controls that I'm trying to insert here. Enable position tracking. Then I'm just going to delete the tracking point that it's added, and then do a right click and go paste tracks. And now it's pasted the same track that I've already done on the previous one. So we don't need to redo the track again. You will, however, have to come back to your effect editor under position tracking and just enable that tracker. And then once you do that, you can see it's tracking on the iPad screen there. Nice. Now, again, we could sort of park it there and call it a day, but I think there's a couple of things that we could make a little better. Number one is if we zoom in on this hand here, we can see some spill of the green light from the iPad. That shouldn't be too hard to fix if we come in here. I'm just make sure we can see it. If we just slide our tolerance up here, up just a little bit, you can see it's helping with that on the hand there. It's not perfect, but it means it's not quite as noticeable from the full frame from this part out. So that's sort of the spill, but you can see that we can also still see these 4 tracking points since they're not being fixed by the key. Now we can sort this as well a little bit, we can improve it. So I'm just going to go to about here, and then I'm going to add an edit in my hero plate up the top here. And then I'm just going to go to my effects, key, and I'll throw on an animat here. Now, because I've already got an effect here, you're going to have to hold the Option or the Alt key, depending on Mac or Windows, while you drag it on top. This is how you can stack effects. Otherwise, it's just going to replace the effect that's on the clip with the one you're dragging on. Right, so I'm just going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to use my oval tool as opposed to my poly tool this time, and just make little animats right on top of all these tracking points. And go tracking up here, and just tick one of these empty boxes, which will open my tracking window. And then I can just hover this over one of the tracking points and hit go. Now, annoyingly, I need to go through and just select all my masks that I've made and enable the track on them all one by one, even though they're all selected. But once I did that, it seems to have worked. They are all covering their track. And the easy way to test that is just to mute my tracking plate that I've got here and see what it looks like. So we've made our tracking points disappear for most of the clip. They're still there for the picking up, but then once it's steady, I've removed them from there. Now we could get into, now we could make an animate shape and manually keyframe it and track it for the pickup part as well. But I'm not going to bother with that just now. We could spend a bunch more time refining this and making it a bit better. I could have also made my insert slider actually move across the way should I wanted to. If I was doing this on an actual film project, I probably would have animated a call ringing with the character's profile picture. I would have made this an actual slider that goes across, like an iPad would, and we would of course have the characters to camera in the lower right here of the call as well. But I think you get the general idea of doing a basic screen insert here. We've looked at inserting, we've looked at keying, we've looked at tracking, and I think all the principles that we've looked at in this example you could use for a number of other visual effects shots. You could use it for keying in a green screen background to add in any kind of background you want. You could use animate masking to grab a portion of one shot and put it into another shot. Like say you like the sky from one shot but the performance in another. I've seen that happen a couple of times. If you break this down, then you can use the principles that we've used here in this effects build to help you with a number of other visual effects shots. And don't forget, if this was your actual edit timeline that you're doing this on, you'd want to tidy it up when you're done. And how I'd go about doing that is just condense this down to only the layers that you need. So we didn't need that tracking plate anymore. And then I would just make sure to select all my layers using shift click there. And I'll just use this button here, collapse. And that's just going to nest these down all into one instance. That can just be rendered on its own. We see the call start to go off, and then we've got our track there. And that is the extremely long-winded way of doing a simple offline comp of a screen insert for the uninitiated. So I'm hoping that at least some of you found that useful. And don't forget, if you are on the editor tier on Patreon, then I'll be uploading all of this footage there for you, that was used in all these various comps for you to practice this with. So you guys can have fun with that. And in the next instance of AE200, we'll be looking at metadata of ingesting ALEs, what metadata you should add manually yourself to track, and tagging stuff along the way, exporting it out, adding it to spreadsheets, stuff like that, populating spreadsheets, sharing stuff around, music queue information, all that jazz, metadata galore. We'll take a good look at it. So until then, guys, take it easy. Hope all your projects are going very, very well. The world of post-production is treating you nice. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. See ya.